Now I'm going to turn over the introductions of our speaker to Martha Butterfield, the Program Coordinator of NJCTS. Marty?
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the presentation portion of today's webinar. Our speaker is Cheryl Ludwig, who received her graduate degree in speech pathology. Cheryl is a licensed speech-language pathologist with 35 years' experience working with children in public schools and in private practice, as well as serving as an adjunct professor at the College of New Jersey. On behalf of NJCTS, Cheryl presents in-service training to educators in schools, colleges, and universities across New Jersey. She currently works as a speech pathologist in a county special services school district. Cheryl and her husband are the parents of 3 children, all diagnosed with TS and associated disorders. Joining Cheryl for the Q&A portion of this webinar will be Janine Howley, who has been an educator for over 25 years. Janine's undergrad and graduate degrees are in special education. On behalf of NJCTS, she has conducted workshops on Tourette syndrome and associated disorders for professionals in many New Jersey school districts as well as colleges and universities. She is a middle school teacher in Ocean County, where she was recently selected Teacher of the Year. Janine and her husband are the parents of an adult child with TS. I'd like to welcome Cheryl to our Wednesday is TS Day webinar series, and I'll now turn the program over to her.
Thank
Cheryl,
you, Marty.
You're welcome.
Good evening and welcome to a presentation that I hope you will find helpful whether you're a teacher, support staff, parent, or student. A special welcome to any young person watching tonight. It is your homework we're talking about, so this information is for you. We will address some issues faced by students with Tourette syndrome and associated disorders, but the strategies are sound educational practice for any student. There will be several slides with many bullet points. When these appear, I will give you a chance to scan the slide, and then we'll highlight a few of the key points. I have included a lot of fun visuals, and I would ask any young viewers to watch for the dog slides to see how many different dogs you find. Remember this one with a headache. He's the first one. Why? That's the question asked over and over again by students. Why do I have to do homework? Or why do I have so much homework? As educators, we often hear negative comments about homework policies. This is especially true when it comes to a child with learning disabilities or other issues like Tourette. At the end of a long day, homework often seems like a cruel punishment that turns a home into a battleground and creates more stress than already exists with this diagnosis. The truth is that everyone gets something out of the experience. Teachers are reassured that the material presented in class is understood. Completion of the homework lets them know how to pace their instruction, when to review, and when to introduce new skills. Students, despite their grumbling, gain confidence that allows them to build new skills onto the foundation. This is scaffolding. It's important to learn early on and to teach students, especially those with TS, to identify their strengths and needs and respectfully advocate for themselves by offering ideas about what they think might help. There is great satisfaction in completing your work independently. Parents, you have the toughest job in the equation, but you also bring the most to it. The opportunity to be an observer, to witness the frustration with a task, then to suggest strategies, help your student organize, and cheer on the success that builds confidence. Keeping harmony is the key. Teachers get the homework in some form, the parent is not angry, and the child is not stressed in the process. Our end goal is to develop a working partnership between the teacher, parent, and student. This needs to include frequent communication between the three and a philosophy of flexible structure and creative response. Some discussion between the teacher, child study team, and parents and the student may result in some formal accommodations in the IEP. Just a few of those may include a reduction in the amount of homework, a restructuring of the homework schedule, perhaps just one subject per night, acceptance of work returned in alternative form on the word processor or orally on tape, and extended time to complete longer projects without penalty. Throughout tonight's webinar, you will hear reference to the word scaffolding. The educational interpretation of this is not that far from a builder's. Skills in a classroom are presented in a hierarchy. New skills are presented and built upon a foundation of basics, hence the term scaffolding. Nobody wants to stand on the top without a rock-solid foundation. It might be helpful to think of the school year as a construction project. We set the foundation in the fall. Review of old material will bring the information back into the memory system and set the stage for future learning. Students at this time will be doing review worksheets, and most say that their homework is easy. We build the walls in the winter. Time to build the new skills onto old ones. Homework typically looks like drill and practice work of new concepts introduced at regular intervals. Smaller projects may be interspersed to begin the process of generalization. We spackle in the spring. Most concepts for the grade level are mastered by this time, and students have the opportunity to apply the skills and knowledge to a variety of situations and tasks. This is a great time for cooperative learning projects, team projects, reports, and activities to test the child's understanding of the subject. It is also the time when achievement tests are typically administered. We add a little paint, and in June we've got a finished product, only to begin again in September. It's important to remember that students diagnosed with Tourette syndrome and associated disorders are more complex than your average student. The cycle of tic behavior, OCD behavior, ADHD issues, social issues, and remembering that school is a very social place, and then any medication issues can make things a little more complicated. Just a few things to keep in mind as you move through the school year are to keep the big picture in mind. We want our students to return every morning inspired to face a new challenge and comfortable in taking risks in a safe, predictable, and supportive learning environment. We need to take things again one day at a time, knowing that these children are variable and change day to day as their symptoms wax and wane. Be ready to be flexible. Parents, it's your chance to build a partnership with a teacher by providing strategies and things that you know work and have not worked in the past. Teachers, if you come across a strategy that helps the student, it's important to pass that back to the parent. Being creative and looking for ways that a child can demonstrate competence of material in alternative forms. And let's keep a positive mindset that homework does have a purpose and is not intended as torture. Some children with TS at the end of the school day tend to bring home baggage. Parents need to be cognizant of this and make homework adjustments accordingly. If this is your child as they walk through the front door, some accommodations are most likely necessary. In establishing effective homework and study strategies, a great place to start is with self-assessment. You can't know where to go if you don't know where you are. For children with Tourette's and any of the associated disorders, the day-to-day variability in symptoms and transitions to new situations will pose a challenge. The routine at home is never the same day-to-day, and this self-assessment tool is often ignored. I would strongly urge this, especially for upper middle school, high school, and college students. At the end of the presentation, there are some references about some surveys that you can access. Do you know your learning style? Is your student a visual, auditory, tactile, or kinesthetic learner? Many times kids with TS and ADHD tend to be stronger visual learners, having more difficulty with the auditory. This again will be the case if a child is diagnosed with central auditory processing disorder. It's important to match the instructional style and the study style to the child. Adding music and song to the learning to wake up both sides of the brain can be helpful. I'm wondering if anybody remembers Schoolhouse Rock. What's the child's internal clock? At the peak of alertness or feeling most sluggish, you need to know, so you schedule your homework time accordingly. Don't schedule it during a sleepy time. Attention skills are sometimes improved following activities of large muscle use. So it's time to run around outside after school before the homework session, a way to relieve the day's stress and create a positive homework session. Fatigue can also be a factor. Children with Tourette's often give their best efforts during the school day and may have increased tic release periods or fatigue once they're at home. Medication side effects could factor in as well. High school and academic advisors at the college level should always consider these patterns when helping a student to schedule classes. Students in college may also want to consider this in their dorm selection process. Going on down this list, our family and extracurricular schedule are important to look at long and short-term calendars. This is helpful in scheduling big projects and avoiding conflict. Most teachers will know these plans about 4 to 6 weeks in advance, so you need to help your student dedicate specific time to organize and break these down. The study environment in the home is one that you need to consider, whether it's a quiet place or going to the library. It will factor into the level of success. The student needs to know their strengths and how to use them, and their needs and how to ask for accommodations or to try new strategies. Work out some accommodations in advance and use them for just as long as you need them. Then help the student to be aware of changes that may require updating these strategies. Look to some unusual resources. And then finally, resources that are readily available. If your student tends to be scattered in the approach to homework, it's time to get organized. It will set your student up for success. So what can teachers do at school to help a student at home? And here's that first slide with all the bullet points. So take a minute to glance it over. And I think the important points on here are remembering we're looking for quality over quantity. If a student can demonstrate mastery of a particular concept with perhaps half of the homework, it's something to consider. Completing all 30 math problems sometimes is not necessary if they have the concept after just 10. The other point that I would encourage is now with technology being what it is, consider using email to convey or receive assignments back and forth. I know this was a huge stress reliever in my home when my students were able to finish homework, send it off to the teacher, particularly essays and that sort of thing, by email, and there wasn't the issue that it was making it there successfully in the backpack in the morning. Okay, Kelly. Another set of bullet points here. I'll give you a moment. A couple of really important considerations would be to, in the later elementary years, begin teaching students strategies for note-taking. We know from our own experience as adults that in high school and college, most of what we were able to take from lectures we had to keep in notebooks. And teaching students how to do this efficiently using shortcuts and abbreviations and organization will really set them up for success as they move through their academic career. Time management by example, and also perhaps giving some information about the homework that will be assigned at the beginning of the class so the student can see how it relates to the lesson. It's very difficult as the bell is ringing and they're supposed to be changing classes to write the assignment down, understand what you were to do, and then ask any questions. Okay, Kelly. And teachers can let calm prevail. A calm voice, a calm approach will help to keep anxiety low in the classroom and for this child. In order to have successful homework time, I think we have to have some successful school time. And a school environment is the place where we can design things that will really benefit the student. Creating this learning environment is not without its challenges. Tic behavior and intrusive thoughts and compulsions of OCD are self-distracting. ADHD makes it difficult to ignore what's going on around you, and then any anxiety issues pose a threat to all learning success. Children with TS at the elementary and middle school level will generally benefit from being close to the speaker, the blackboard, or the AV equipment, and away from distractions, both human and environmental. If you have the chance to offer alternatives in learning spaces, it encourages a student with Tourette's to evaluate the situation and make adjustments. Sometimes just a change of a chair during independent reading will help to extend the attention to the activity. For elementary school classrooms where transitions to new activities introduce chaos, practice a transition, and it will firmly set a routine and pattern that allows the children to begin schoolwork more efficiently and quickly. Again, teaching them how to settle themselves down and get to the task at hand. For students in high school and college, professors are encouraged to make accommodations to allow a student flexibility in movement and seating. I know of a college professor that cleared the back of the classroom for a student with Tourette's, provided a podium and a stool behind the desk. And without the confines of the lecture hall desk, the student had the freedom to kind of pace, move quietly about the back of the room, and do the ticks without distracting other students, all while attending to the lecture. And the final result of that situation was an A for the course. Next. And you're going to have questions pop up about fairness. And when that comes, you need to have that quick, snappy comeback. The one that you see on the screen is true, and we'll stop the question every time. And it was explained to me by my pediatrician when we began to deal with the issues of all three children having Tourette's and associated disorders and all yelling at the others about things that were fair and not fair. Next one. And what can students do at home, or at school rather, to help themselves at home? Okay. Always and absolutely. And I'll give you a minute to scan this. The habits, good or bad, that you instill in the elementary grades will stay with the student for life. So we need to encourage the kids to be an active part of the class, creating a positive presence in the classroom. Organization is really at the heart of all of this, and learning to keep materials together, writing things down. If the teacher considers it important to write down on a board, then the student should as well. If you provide your students with highlighters and those bright neon-colored Post-it notes right at the beginning and show them how to use those efficiently, that practice and habit will continue on through their high school and college years. And while we're talking about taking notes, let's move through some of those points. Again, I'll give you a moment to scan this. And some of the highlights. If a student comes to class knowing the kinds of material that will be addressed, it's much easier to follow the lecture and the discussion and decide what's important to write down. That's why we need to encourage our students during free study time at home, read ahead on the assignments, look at the chapter questions so you know what to listen for. And that's the critical word. If you turn on the news and you ask the child to listen for the weather tomorrow, they're going to come back most times with reliable information. If you just say listen to the weather, you may not get the same responses. Developing the system of symbols and abbreviations to streamline note-taking, and beginning to teach them simple note-taking skills in the elementary school level, which will then expand as they go up each grade level. Okay, Kelly? All right. A suggested guideline for teachers from the website schoolbehavior.com is to keep the density of new information as low as possible during a lecture, roughly 50% of the lecture time. In addition, if there's any possible way to use a skeleton note format to facilitate note-taking, it will create the ideal scenario. Research suggests that a teacher who provides a partial lecture note in an outline or schematic form will give the student the maximum opportunity to learn in 3 areas: to stay focused and maintain active attention, because they've got a skeleton format of the notes in front of them, to actively participate in the instruction by filling in key points and definitions, vocabulary on that form, and then to retain and understand more information as the student is able to contribute to a classroom discussion. The presentation of material needs to be at a slow pace or slower pace that matches the skills and maturation of the class. Pausing to allow for the processing of information and writing it down is important, using chunking strategies where information is presented together, followed by a pause, and then allowing the student the opportunity to develop questions based on what they've heard. Just to make sure the students get it, it's helpful for teachers to leave a few minutes at the end of the lecture and dedicate it to questions, just as we will today, about the day's lecture, reviewing the notes they took, asking for clarification on a homework assignment, or using their highlighter to make the key points more vivid. Teachers would prefer that students most times have a complete understanding of a smaller volume of information than to just hit some of the high points. This is what creates your knowledge base that allows scaffolding of skills. Next. So students really need to listen for signals. Listen for the introduction of the lesson. It's going to let them know what will be covered, what their expectations are for what they should know and learn, and to the kind of attention that it will require them to expend. Then listen for verbal cues as the teacher is giving the discussion or lecture. Things like, write this down, don't forget this fact, or as a result of. So those kinds of comments at the beginning of sentences and lecture points will really clue a student into what they should write down. We also need to watch for signs. Teachers, in most cases, are very active and lively people and will combine words with body language and speech changes to emphasize a point. Watch for gestures. Watch for information written on the board. How do they count off key points with their fingers? Give a direction to look in a book or write down a fact. Also watch for more subtle signs. They take long pauses before or after an idea to give the student time to process the information, repeating the information to emphasize the point, or then using some questioning techniques. Homework contracts work nicely if the child has input into it. Creating some reasonable rules together regarding homework and schoolwork in general, let's just figure out what will work, and change a school year into a very positive experience. These should change year to year, and especially at major transitions, like elementary to middle school and middle school to high school. As students also become a little bit more active in their social schedules and extracurricular activities, homework contracts can kind of keep the process going smoothly. Talk about when and where it will be done, how the child will access help at home if they need it, and how they can request teacher help. Post your contract, refer to it periodically. Students are more likely to buy into that which they help to create. Be sure to praise your student for consistent efforts. Things like, you have no idea how proud I am that you finished your homework before dinner. I had a rough day at the office, and I appreciate your efforts. Adults have responsibilities at work with rewards and consequences, and school is a child's work. It's a family decision if completion of schoolwork or their contract will earn privileges or consequences, but it is a reasonable consideration. I would also suggest updating those at the end of every report card. Building a home environment that is conducive to studying is both fun and challenging. What works for one student in a household may not work for another, but then there are options. Deciding if you have a desk in a room away from where the parent is able to monitor, or you have a study area in a more central location in the house. Maybe the kitchen table, the dining room table. If a computer workstation is used, there must be strict rules about computer use. Materials being readily available. Considering pairing homework tasks for parents along with your child's study time so that everyone is sitting quietly at the same time to do some work. It's hard to break from our busy, technology-bound lives, and your homework site should be away from the flow of traffic, cell phones definitely off, and an understanding that quiet and calm must prevail during this time frame. Research varies a little bit with regard to background music, and many students do a little better with some soft volume background music playing. However, earphones are not the ideal situation. As an educator, their personal preference is that parents are involved in the homework process. A number of our students are in after-school programs, and homework is done in those situations and becomes the responsibility of the after-school program, and parents are dropping out of the communication loop. It's important to remember to at least review homework with your student, spend time discussing projects, and to know how your child is learning the material. You might also, again, consider establishing a family homework time where parents can balance a checkbook, read a magazine, the student is completing the homework, the student has access to the parent for support and help, and it's also a wonderful model to show our students how to sustain attention. What you see on this slide is called Homework Central. It's a little fuzzy because it was hard to pull off of the website, but it is an idea from the September '09 issue of the Family Fun magazine. Younger students really get excited about making these, and it is a display board that you can get at your office supply store, and then a metal ruler is glued at the top, and things are stuck on there with magnets and Velcro and clothespins, and as you can see in the lower left corner, the entire thing folds up and tucks in the corner of a closet. This creates a nice, calm space and a quiet space for a student to do their homework. The materials are right there and accessible, and you won't have that up and down and run around the room to find what you need. At the end of the presentation, I do have the reference so you can get more complete directions. At a recent conference on sensory issue for special needs, the information about that related to homework came up, and that is what you see on this slide. Depending on whether your student at the end of the school day is in need of calming strategies or alerting strategies, these are some of the things that you can do in terms of how you create a visual environment with your lighting, things with tasting and snacks, whether we need warm, chewy kinds of snacks or things that are crunchy and spicy and sour to wake up and get alert again. My best suggestion would be to consult with an occupational therapist in your school for some more information on this concept. At the beginning, we talked about organization being right at the top of the list in terms of success for homework. This falls into the executive function skills, and organization is really key in terms of making things flow a little bit smoother. It's not going to help as much with the student that's struggling with the subject, but if the things that they need to get the homework started and worked on are available and ready, it does make things a little easier. A monthly calendar and a weekly calendar or some kind of a homework notepad that is referred to consistently is helpful. Making sure that your student is able to break down large assignments into smaller, manageable segments and then to create due dates. A lot of times we have recommended that we match the book cover to the notebook to the folder in terms of color. And as I've done this for year after year, I'm finding that a big loose leaf binder that contains all of the notebooks and folders and papers is much easier because you're only dealing with one thing, and you can rearrange and move papers around. Keeping check in terms of monitoring the notebook and seeing that it stays organized. We all start out with great intentions in September, and then by November and December kind of falter a little bit. So we want to keep monitoring that we are doing things the way that needs to be done. And again, packing the backpack efficiently. In terms of organizational strategies in the classroom, many times it's helpful if the teachers will allow the student to pack the backpack at the noontime mark with everything that's going to need to go home from the morning studies. So if you have 3 subjects in the morning that are going to have homework, get all of those things into the backpack before lunch, and there's far less chaos when buses are called at 3 o'clock. Next one, Kelly. Okay, study techniques. This is what it all comes down to because, of course, in most situations, our students are taking tests to monitor their progress. Encouraging your student to saying things out loud and studying really does help to commit things to memory. If you can use a tape recorder and let them record questions or just facts, reading it aloud and then listening to it again is helpful. Flashcards was a strategy that was mentioned in almost every research article that I surveyed for this presentation. And again, they said these are quickly accessible in a pocket, in the visor of a car, in a backpack, when you're standing in line at the grocery store, so that a student can have very short bursts of study and very brief segments of study, but doing that over time really seems to help embed the information into the memory system. Mnemonic devices will help increase memory by association, and the sillier and more vivid they are, and students love to create these, the better they remember it. I have yet to forget my cranial nerves based on what I was taught as a mnemonic device in college. Letting the students start the easiest homework first and building the momentum to then tackle things that are more difficult. There's better energy and concentration at the start of a homework session. Next one, Kelly. And then we're always going to have these moments. We do this as adults when we get up and walk to the water cooler or just take a walk down a hallway, and students will experience this. Pencils are going to snap, tempers will flare, and it's important to schedule breaks during the homework time. You need to plan them. It gives the students something to work towards. You need to time them so that they don't become extended and making it difficult to come back to the task, and then end them and say, time to get back to work. It could be run the dog around the block, put some music on and dance, go kick your soccer ball, but when the 10-minute mark is up or whatever it is you decide at home, then it's done and we're back to the table and we do another session. If you remember the Millionaire Show, this is a wonderful strategy because we don't want to do our children's homework. This is their responsibility, and it's important for the teachers to know how much they are able to do on their own, and this is all about independence. Institute a lifeline policy to work towards becoming more independent, and the student will have these 4 opportunities in a homework session to access help and see if they can do it with minimal lifeline use. I think that completed homework with all lifelines left intact deserves a treat. And so now we have final exams and term papers and tests. And again, it's important to equip our students with some test strategies. Of course, advanced preparation and not having crammed the night before is always going to be better and help to neutralize test anxiety because your students are confident that they know the material. Checking for accommodations and provisions in the IEP about testing is very important. Parents are working to insert strategies and accommodations that will support their children, and teachers are bound to use these to support the student in the situation. Again, we talked about that earlier. It might be extended time. It might be offering responses in an alternative form. Sometimes if the ticks are particularly bad and involved, it may require that the student have an alternative test situation with some extended time, as the stress will sometimes increase ticks. If it's possible, we need to provide our students with some kind of a study guide prior to exams or review several days before so that they know what kinds of questions to expect as you're delivering the information over the course of the study unit. Pose questions and insert information and questions that would be similar to what you would put on the test. If it's possible, give the students some blank scrap paper or a 3x5 cards so that when they sit to take a test, they can jot things down from their memory and begin to organize their ideas, particularly for an essay question. And we want the students to read and then reread directions so they're absolutely clear on what needs to be done. Skim the test quickly. It's going to give them a little boost of confidence when they see some questions that they can answer confidently, and then move through the test one step at a time. Essay questions require them to take some time to plan and organize their response. And then finally, if it's possible, giving the students a creative way to demonstrate mastery of a skill. It does not always have to be with test questions. Perhaps it could be with some kind of a report or some kind of a creative project. And now we move out of high school and into college. And initially did not have a lot of information about the college level in, but that is where we are hopeful our students are headed, and it's a whole different story, so we really need to consider college level. With this framework, the structure and framework to manage academic tasks successfully should be internalized by the college level. The students have the chance to draw on a past experience and move forward with confidence independently. We need to tell them to resist this temptation because it's not a productive place to study. And as I walk through college dorms, this is where you see, I think, 70% of college freshmen. Students need to be comfortable asking for help. Professors generally have office hours and additional help time scheduled into their workday and are available to support students either one-on-one or in a group. It's important for them to develop friendships at university level and develop study groups. 3 is an ideal number because for our students that have learning difficulties or tics and associated disorders, it keeps too much information from coming into a study session when you have a lot of input from a number of different students. With 3 students in the group, then one person can at least have a partner should the other one not be able to make it. Monitoring the learning environment is important, particularly if you are shopping for colleges. Poor acoustics and limited visual support will compromise the student's success. Time management involves the student being completely on their own and responsible for deadlines. And students are needing to use technology to support their learning, but again at the university level must be very disciplined and cautious about becoming distracted by the technology that's available. So I hope you've been listening for the information that will help your students succeed at this sometimes daunting task. There are some websites that I have posted for you to access additional homework help. These are, in most cases, websites where you can post a question and the responses are either a part of the program or in some cases, I think it's the studentquestions.com. There are professors and tutors at the other, at the web, available through the website, and they will get back to the student with responses. The 1-888-NBC-10, that was a number that worked, and I apologize for this. It wasn't in force a short time ago. I did try and call it this evening and had difficulty getting through, but it was a homework helpline sponsored by TV10 and the University of Pennsylvania, where graduate students were helping students one-on-one with homework. And if I can find better information about a new phone number, I will make sure that that's posted to the website. These are the references, oh, fantastic, Kelly, that are for a nice set of checklists by Leslie Packard. This is a book that is just out in the last month. And the Family Fun Study Carol is a magazine that has, I think, 2 or 3 pages of directions on how you can build that. The Virginia Tech website has a wonderful study survey so that your skills can be surveyed in 7 areas, and then based on the responses, you decide which particular area you need to adjust for success. And when things go well, we need to celebrate. For students with Tourette syndrome and associated disorders, having the cooperative support from parents, teachers, and school staff is key to school success. Using the concept of scaffolding with strategies and accommodations year to year will help prepare the students for the challenges of college and the workplace. The sky really is the limit. And for the young listeners this evening, if you counted 11 dogs, you're correct. You also just used a really important listening, learning, and study strategy, and that is to listen or to look for specific information embedded in a lecture. Congratulations. This ends the formal part of the presentation tonight, and I believe we are going to move into our Q&A, and Janine is ready for your questions.
All right, Cheryl, thank you very much. We'll now begin the Q&A portion of tonight's webinar. What I'm going to do is read questions that were posted. Not every question. Some of them I was able to answer online. So we're going to answer questions that are important to, I think, the general listening audience. So I'm going to start right away with the first question. My son has issues organizing long-term projects. He has Asperger's and is not adjusting well to changing classes several times a day. There are some suggestions. He doesn't seem to write down dates well in the planner, so there are some suggestions that might be helpful for him.
I would request of the teachers if they would please break down the task and give him short-term goals, like if it's a big research project, and ask them, could we limit maybe in 1 week this part is due and in 3 days this part is due, but ask them for a little guidance on that. I know myself, I'm happy to help parents with that. Generally, I give a rubric to students so that they can actually see what's expected, and then they'll know when different components of it would be due.
Okay. You said something, a rubric. Say that again. I didn't quite get
A rubric. A rubric is it's basically a breakdown of the assignment. It's a breakdown of what will need to be completed, and then they can look through and maybe just knock out the easiest parts or the most visual parts or, the parts that they think are the most difficult. Get those over with first.
Okay, got it. Another question about organizational skills seems to be a huge issue for an 11-year-old. Would some of those techniques you just mentioned be helpful for someone to become more successful in the organization skill area?
Yeah, and organizational skills are one of those things that you just don't come by naturally at all times. Some people do, some people don't. And when somebody doesn't come by those organizational skills naturally, they have to be taught directly.
And practiced.
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you elaborate on the more creative ways to demonstrate mastery, such as taking a test orally? I mean, what are the chances of that being successful, or that schools even being willing to do that?
If it's in the IEP or a 504 plan, the schools would be required to do that. Generally speaking, if a student needs help with reading and understanding things, they should, as Cheryl said in one of her slides, they should feel comfortable in asking the instructor, hey, can you help me with this? Maybe even a parent contact of, sometimes my son or daughter might need you to read things or restate them. Oftentimes we see restating a question in a 504 or an IEP. In fact, restating a question is something that's even allowed on standardized testing.
Okay, so what that points up then is getting these kinds of things in writing in a 504 or your IEP.
Yeah, really it's just quality teaching, and most teachers that I'm familiar with are happy to do those kind of things. But, sometimes maybe you might need a little something in writing.
Okay. What's your best suggestion when you see a child getting frustrated by homework and their tics are getting worse because of the anxiety?
Take a break.
Take a break.
I would definitely say that they need to take a break, move to a new environment. Some of the things that Cheryl had put on one of the slides with some of the things that will help calming by different scents and different textures, different flavors, that might be helpful.
Okay.
The other thing, too, Marty, is that if there is a partnership, and that's why this is so critical for our children with Tourette's and associated disorders, the partnership allows, I don't want to say privilege, but it allows communication between the parent, the teacher, and an understanding with the student that if there is a night that is just totally overwhelming, the parent can make adjustments to the homework or the homework session or how much this child does. I know very frequently if it was to write spelling words 5 times and I just knew that that wasn't going to happen without major catastrophe, I would say, you know what, get them done once. Let's see if we can get to the list one time. And then I would send a note back in the next day and say, the release time for tics or migraine headaches or whatever were just really difficult last night. and we made some effort. And I think if the student can take something back into school to show some effort towards the end product, it's going to be better received than if you just say, don't do your homework.
Okay.
So we would make some adjustment for that. But then there was an understanding with the teacher and myself that there has to be this give and take depending on the kind of night the student's having. It isn't worth it if you have a child that's going to bed in tears and screaming, I'm never going back to that place again, because the homework is consistently overwhelming. So I think if it's a consistent issue, that needs to be addressed a little bit differently than if it's just an occasional one.
Okay. We got a follow-up question. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt
Well,
you?
I just wanted to remind everybody that at one point Cheryl had a slide and it talked about background music. Sometimes just hearing some music, preferably non-linguistic music, music without words, could be helpful in soothing somebody that's full of anxiety about homework.
Okay. There was a follow-up question to the part about the previous answer about taking a break.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how do you get them back? Do you set a time for the break? Is it like, have a cup of warm milk and you come back when you're done with it? Like, how do you set the goal for ending the break?
Setting a timer, I think, is the best suggestion.
Okay.
Or if it's a very specific task, that, go out and kick your soccer ball 30 times against the side of the shed. And when that 30 times is done, you're back in.
Got it. Okay.
You know what else, Marty, is to build it into your contract. If you have a homework contract, build it in. Say, these, when I really am overwhelmed and I need a break, this is what I want to do. And have the student generate some of that so they have some input in knowing how to say, this is how I'm going to take a break and then come back.
All right. And then they bought into something, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. This one is having to do with the teen who's at the point where any suggestion from mom is immediately thrown out. We all know about that, right? And so
I'm sorry for laughing. It's just,
how do you suggest strategies for studying and reducing frustration with older kids?
That's actually based on teenagers' amygdala goes crazy when they hear mom's voices. And so recognizing that, you might want to try to pass them a note. Or that's a real challenging one. It certainly is. And it's sometimes hard for us as moms to try to keep a calm voice and a calm head in the face of frustrating circumstances like that.
So there's no real good answer for that one.
Well, the other thing, too, is that I think if you point out to the student who is approaching high school that there are definite consequences that are going to follow and not necessarily imposed by the parent. And, and we ran into that situation many times in my household where it was a battle over the homework, and I would say, well, look, I am here to support you, and you have a very important decision to make. You either accept that help, or if you take this assignment in as it is, then you have to expect whatever response from your teacher and then deal with that. And that ended that real quickly.
Okay.
It's like natural consequence.
All right. How do I get a teen who is angry and depressed to partake in self-assessment?
Ooh, tough one.
Another good question. I would suggest that if the student is involved in counseling of any kind, that would be an issue that
I would say
dealt with at a counseling session.
Also, modeling might help. If the parent could actually model that themselves, like, I'm really feeling frustrated right now, but this is what I'm going to try to do. Possibly even model that for the child.
Okay, but counseling might be a good approach there as well. Maybe to get the counseling in place, and then maybe the rest of it will follow.
If the child's involved with a counselor, then those are issues I think that are valid to be brought up in a counseling session. Is that you really have to understand yourself a little bit to know what you need, and to encourage students to assume the responsibility for their own advocacy. By the time they leave the high school level, they have to begin to do that self-assessment and say, this is where my strengths are and this is where I really am not so strong, and how can I access the resources that will support me to improve.
Yeah, and I think it comes a point in their lives when they have to get it. They have to figure that out for themselves, and hopefully they figure it out before they're
And a lot of this
disappointed.
is just, I think, a normal part of growth and maturation through those teenage years.
I also thought Cheryl's point about teaching mistake recovery was really important, and that's something else that we can model for children, is to model mistake recovery, like, oh, man, I really blew it on that, but this is how I'm going to take care of it the next time, or, tomorrow's another day kind of thing.
All right. Any tips on teens that, have to, their nighttime hours are, 10 to midnight, but have to wake up at 6 and get going? I mean, it seems to me that happens pretty commonly with teenagers, that they seem to have a different clock than the rest of us.
Well, that's a well-documented fact, and it gets even more bizarre if they're in college because they're up all night, and I think bedtime is between 4 and 6 a.m., and the sleep-wake cycle is really kind of distorted.
They need a consistent bedtime, if at all possible. And they need to avoid caffeine or high sugary drinks or any kind of stimulant that will make it difficult for them to get.
Including a lot of internet activity.
Oh, yeah.
And video game activity. It's really important, and there's more and more studies and literature coming out that say that kind of stimulation at the very end of a day can have some impact on a student's ability to kind of relax and settle themselves into a pre-sleep kind of a state.
Okay. I have another teen question. We have a teenager who never learned strategies for studying or note-taking in elementary years because he was smart enough not to need to study. Now he's in high school, and now he's finding out that those skills that he kind of apparently didn't pay much attention to early on, he's missing. And so any suggestions on how to do that, or can someone be trained? What would you do with a student maybe to get them trained to do that?
It's never too late to learn. They could always learn the study skill strategies. If they could go back through this webinar and maybe take down some strategies, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
I would say just the very beginning is learning to use highlighters and learning to use Post-it notes, where they're posting questions and key vocabulary and concepts on Post-it notes in the margins, is a very excellent start in learning how to sift through information and pull the salient points and then organize it for their note-taking. And also learning to use an outline form, because that really organizes notes. There were some note-taking and study skills courses offered at college level for my students, and they suggested that once you come home from the course or the lecture, you head right to the computer and you retype it. And you put it in outline form, and the information was fresh in your memory, but that second round of thinking it through, saying it through, and going through the information again really seemed to help students organize it better. It's time-consuming, but it really sets the kids up for a better study session and test session.
There's also a lot of graphic organizers available.
Right.
You can go on the Internet to find some suggested graphic organizers that will help with those kind of things.
Okay. I had a comment that I'd like your ladies to comment on from a special ed teacher, and she had found that assigning homework early in the period distracts students. So I'm curious on, I didn't hear exactly how you approached that. I was too busy answering questions. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, that's a good point, that if you assign it too early, then they want to hurry up and get it done so they don't have to do it for homework that night. So if you could even have it maybe on an index card that you just post at the end of the period, or don't assign it actually until the end of the period, that's better. But you're right, if you assign it too soon in the class period, then they want to try to knock that out while they're supposed to be attending to the lesson at hand.
Perhaps another thought is that if you give some information about what the homework's going to be about and without giving the specific assignment. So if that's stated at the beginning, your homework tonight is going to be on, a particular battle in the Revolutionary War. So listen carefully for that information so that your homework will be easier tonight without giving the actual assignment. It's just a cue in for the students to know what to listen for during the course of the lecture or the teaching.
Okay. A teacher said that she recommended Evernote, and I'm not sure in what context that was because I missed what you were saying, but do you want to comment on that?
It's actually, it says, the suggestion is a note-taking service. Evernote.com is a great tool for archiving notes. You can search your handwriting even if it's messy.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Thank you,
well,
Kelly.
I did not know about.
Let's see. You have another question about note-taking skills, but anyway, we kind of addressed that already. So,
Marty, if I could interject here, for teachers who are listening, one of the great things that you could do that Cheryl pointed out was the partial lecture notes, like cloze activities, C-L-O-Z-E, those kind of activities where many of the salient points that a teacher's going to make, they've typed up in advance and leave blank spaces. One of the teachers that I'm working with this year does that frequently, and I find it really helps the kids to look at the visual cues and remember the stuff, and then they can use that as a study guide.
okay.
The other point that I forgot to make earlier, Kelly, is that note-taking really is a life skill, and it's required for success in the workplace and for social situations later on if kids are going to be members of clubs or organizations as young adults or adults. And that's why I think it's so important that in those later elementary years we begin to teach these skills and really focus on this is how it's done, instead of just saying take notes and the students kind of say, well, what's that mean? Okay, when we say take notes, this is what we mean. You write down number one, you write down the title, and then you make points under that. And when we shift topic, we make point number two, and it's just a more methodical kind of way of approaching things. But it really does sometimes have great impact later on in how people can be successful at work.
Okay. Question about a student who has independent study courses online. How do you let them go online without getting distracted by online games?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Are there parental controls that can be set for that?
I would guess so, but I don't know.
I'm not that familiar with it, unfortunately.
Okay. Let's see what else we've got here. How can I help my 10-year-old who is embarrassed that he has accommodations? He wants to avoid using them, but is getting frustrated.
I would encourage the teacher in the classroom to open those accommodations up for other children. Like, for instance, if anybody out there is familiar with an Alpha Smart, it looks like a keyboard for a computer, but it has a screen. And I had a student several years ago that had cerebral palsy, and he didn't want to use that Alpha Smart because he didn't want to look different. And a couple weeks into the school year, one of the kids broke his arm, and I let him use it, and then it was the cool thing. So if perhaps the teacher wouldn't mind opening a few of those accommodations up to make it like just anybody could use it sometimes, but keeping in mind who it's designed for, that's a big help.
Okay. What is the best spot in a classroom to go when a student is having tics or feeling the need to do one?
It depends on the individual classroom. Sometimes it's best if they can get out of the classroom, like maybe go to the bathroom or go get a drink or go to the nurse's office real quick, depending, or counselor's office. Sometimes it's better if they can just get out of the environment. It might be better in the back of the room. It might be better closer to the door. It depends on how the individual classroom is set up. A lot of times the back, where everybody's back is to them, but it depends. For instance, in the science lab that I teach in, students are facing both ways, so there is no real back to the classroom.
But certainly an opportunity to go to the office or go to the nurse's office or any of those, depending on the circumstances, would be appropriate alternatives as well, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes even just getting up and throwing a paper away is enough to relieve that.
Okay. Is there a form for homework contract? Someplace you can go to find that?
That's something I could research. I don't know of any one specific place. My best suggestion is that if you're encouraging students to buy into it and participate in it, then you want their input. And it's very much like a work contract where it's tailored to the individual that's going to be completing the task and those that are going to be monitoring it. And I don't know if there's a particular form. I certainly would think we could probably generate something, but the specific terms and agreements in there, I think, have to be specific to that particular child's learning styles and needs to make it work successfully. And then again, I have seen, I can't say that I have never seen them. I've seen a kind of a more generic contract that was applied to an entire third grade classroom, and all the kids said yes, and we promised to do this and do this and do this, and then the teacher signed it.
Yeah.
That again was not considering any special needs.
Yeah. Is that something that it sounds to me, we've had several questions on a homework contract. It sounds to me it would be something worth doing some research on and making it available online.
And that we can do.
I could just suggest, because while you were discussing that, I minimized the screens that I had, went into a search engine, typed in homework contracts, and got several hits. I happen to be looking
at
clever
girl.
www.interventioncentral.org and homework docs and things like that. So I know that the guidance counselors in my school have homework contracts. I would suggest just doing an internet search for homework contracts and look and see what appeals to you and what would work best as far as your particular child, your particular situation.
And then you can just pull things from it that you think will work the best and make your own.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a student that is allowed to take notes with a laptop. In fact, everybody in the class is allowed to take notes with a laptop.
Okay.
But his student doesn't want to do it. So even though it's available to all the students, it doesn't seem to help this individual student who should be taking advantage of it.
That could be because I don't know what the level of word processing skills are. If that student feels like they can write it faster than they can type it, the whole typing thing might be a difficult concept, or not concept, but that might be a frustrating task for them. You might want to work with them on their typing skills. There's a lot of programs out there to increase typing skills, word processing skills, a lot of game kind of format programs that will help increase the speed with typing.
What if it's not that issue? Could you suggest anything else?
I would suggest asking the teacher if they wouldn't mind making a copy. Like, for instance, when I do notes, I often use an overhead projector. And then when I'm finished, I could take the sheet that I did on the overhead projector and just run a copy on a copy machine and give the child a copy.
Okay.
If it's resistance, that's another issue.
Yeah. All right, ladies. I think we're out of time. So
Cheryl did a terrific job putting this whole presentation together. She deserves lots of kudos for that.
Well, we appreciate both of you.
Thank you for handling Q&A tonight.
Coming in, especially you with a good old stuffed up nose.
Sorry about that.
I know it probably is very hard for you to talk. So I want to thank everyone for joining us on our webinar for Study Skills for Success. There's an exit survey which should show on your screen as you exit. Fill out the evaluation on the exit form, and the chat board will be open and available. It'll be open tomorrow and available for the next 7 days for questions that you may have afterwards. The archive webinar will show up in the next 7 days as well. The website is www.njcts.org. And our next presentation is going to be on October 28th on ADHD by Dr. Richard Zakreski. Thank you, Cheryl and Janine, for tonight's presentation. We appreciate all the support you've given this organization. And this ends tonight's webinar. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Night.